So let's start with weaknesses. They can be relative to a standard, relative to other attributes and skills, or relative to your competitors. It's worth noting that the only person that will ever see these is you, so don't hold back. It's better to identify and understand your weaknesses now than for the interviewer to do it for you later. The former puts you in control and helps you to determine how you'll address them, where the latter puts your interviewer in control and you on the defensive. I'll admit that I do draw a make-believe fine line between weaknesses and what I call gaps. While I'm splitting hairs, differentiating between the two can impact how you prepare. By my definition, a weakness is something inherent in you that follows the guidelines I've laid out and exists regardless of a job. A gap, then, is something you're missing relative to the needs of a particular job. Say a job requires a bachelor's degree, but you have an associate's degree. Or it requires 5 years of experience and you have 2. Gaps that exist for one job may be very different than for another, even though nothing actually has changed about you. For the sake of this exercise, we'll stay focused on just your weaknesses. Hiring decisions typically put more emphasis on strengths, while decisions to not hire put more emphasis on gaps. Unless weaknesses are noteworthy, they can be less significant contributors to the overall hiring decision. Disappointments may be associated with a weakness or a strength, but sometimes they just are. An easy working definition is that there's something you were involved with or contributed to that turned out differently, that is, more on the negative side than expected. For example, you may be very proud of all of the things you did to produce the Iridium report for your manager, but were disappointed when it was never discussed. Or maybe you were disappointed that while working with your nephew at a startup called Donuts R Us, you ran out of funding before you rocked the world with a radical new pastry. Or maybe you pitched a new advertising campaign for reusable toilet paper, only to be beat out by a team that had an in with a client because of their previous work on that award-winning once-a-week diaper change campaign. Or maybe despite all of your best coaching of a coworker, he just wasn't able to create the project plan his manager wanted. Let's also talk about mistakes. Mistakes are one of my favorite interview tools because they say so much about you, that is, assuming you address them appropriately. Well, that's not exactly right, since either way, they do say a lot about you. It's one thing to say that you left the prime rib cooking in the oven overnight after the restaurant closed. It's an entirely different thing to talk about what you learned from that experience and what it is you do differently as a result. Mistakes can be big or small, personal or public. What's even more important is context and how you react it. But like everything else, before you can get to that point, you need to get some mistakes down on paper first. While I'm suggesting very arbitrary divisions between all of the things that make up your experiences, the reality is life is more messy than that. No doubt you'll find individual experiences that demonstrate strengths, weaknesses, mistakes, recognition, and interests all in one example. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, this will most likely be a more common occurrence than you think. For example, remember that project you're so proud of? I bet you think it's a great stage to show off your strengths. Ask yourself if you made some mistakes along the way. Did you have some disappointing setbacks? Maybe some team members were there to make up for your weaknesses. While the arbitrary exercise of categorizing all of your life history is extremely beneficial, don't lose sight of the fact that real life doesn't always happen in arbitrary categories. And don't be afraid to describe it that way in an interview.